so what do you guys learn today in class? Oh, he knows how to brew beer.
Now they should have these standards.
Yeah.
You didn't have the bar last time I was here. You got a table sitting right there.
Yeah, it's
I like this.
And rather than finishing up with hops, it actually finishes with two flavors, coffee and chocolate. And those are actually two different kinds of barley, the roasted barley, that are kilned in such a way as yeah.
No, I didn't make that big.
That is crazy. Could you imagine?
The IPA, the bitter stuff, that for some reason people all like that. I'm not really bitter.
Thank you. Yeah, so this one, thank you. This one is going to have a little more hop content. It's mostly going to be a nice, just rounded beer, and you're going to get a little bit, in addition to a little bit more hop content at the end, you're going to get some roasted malt flavors.
I really don't like coffee. Is it?
As I'm going off campus, I'm having lunch with Dale.
So the Pomona Queen is an amber lager, and it's got a little more hop content. Everything starts with the barley, and that it all gets delivered in these 50-pound bags over here. We take a ton at a time. This isn't actually two-row. This is called Victory, but two-row malts. So this is barley. This barley, there you go, has gone through the malting process, and basically during the malting process.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I gotta get his bar.
There you go. Yeah, so it smells gooder than it actually is, so during the malting process, what you're trying to do is you're trying to convince the seeds, each individual seed, that it's springtime, and because inside the seed, the inside of the seed is called the endosperm, and the endosperm is completely useless in the brewing industry. It cannot be fermented. So what the malting process does is they mix all the seeds with warm water. The seeds think it's spring, they sprout, they grow little rootlets, and then they get all killed. They get kilned. And what's happened during the malting process is the endosperm has been changed into starches, complex starches. The other thing that's happened during the malting process is those starches are it's basically the yolk that the little plant's going to live off to get sprouted. Those are still undigestible by the little plant, but inside the husk, during the malting process, develop enzymes that are going to break down that starch into actual sugars that can be digested by the plant for growth. And those are still in there after the malting process. So what we do here is the rest of the process to take that starch and make fermentable sugars. In order to expose those fermentable sugars, we put all of our grain in there. That's a grain mill. Each batch takes approximately 600 to 700 pounds of barley for a 310-gallon batch. And the only thing that the mill does is it just cracks open all of those little barley kernels just to expose those starches so that so they can't hide out and exactly. The grain goes down into this auger right here, goes up the auger, and when we hook up the right tube, it drops directly into this. This is called the mash tun. And this is where the rest of that process is going to occur in terms of getting those fermentable sugars. Inside the mash tun, we mix the barley with 153-degree water, and what happens then is all of those enzymes go into solution, and they start breaking down those starches inside the barley. That whole process only takes about an hour. Actually, it can take less than that. So it's a really efficient process at 153 degrees. At that point, we have an extremely, almost sickeningly sweet extract that we then take from here and we pump it into here. This is the brew kettle, and this is where we're actually going to quote unquote cook the beer. We do need to boil the beer. That does a couple of things. First of all, it kills off anything like bacteria, wild yeast, anything that could get into the finished batch. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are a number of bacteria that really like beer and the pH of beer. And so there's one called lactobacillus. There's one called acetobacillus that produces vinegar flavors. So we need to get rid of all of those. The other thing that it does, and I'm going to actually excuse myself for just a moment. Thing that you get in the beers, the bittering actually comes from hops. We get hops in pelletized form. These are them. This is my favorite kind of hop. It's called Cascade. If I only had to live with one kind of hops for the rest of my life, this would be it. But they're actually about 200 and some odd.
Looks like rabbit. It is rabbit.
Yes, exactly. And it's
so exactly like it is, or
what?
They're like flowers.
Yeah.
okay.
Rows of food.
They're actually related to marijuana. They're a.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
We'll get the other one.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. But anyway, they.
You probably sell these
There you go.
Okay.
So there are two different compounds in the hops that we're going to try to extract from them. The bittering is actually called alpha acids, and alpha acids will not go into solution at room temperature. So you can soak these all day in room temperature water, and it will not go into solution. The only way to do it is by boiling them, and that's a process called isomerization, and that gets what's called the alpha acids into solution in the beer. The other thing that you can get, if you break this open, and this is why I love Cascades, they have a kind of pine, citrusy aroma to them. That's a classic American hop right there, used in lots of IPAs and other beers. But anyway, to get those out, we also throw them in. But the problem with the flavor compounds and the aroma compounds is they will boil off. And so we actually put, like, if we were adding Cascades just to get that citrusy, piney aroma out of them, we'd add them at the last 2 minutes of the boil, or we would finish the brew, transfer over to a fermenter, cool the beer down, and then throw the hops into there, and that's called dry hopping, when you just throw the hops directly into the beer.
Dry hopping?
Yeah, dry hopping. Yeah.
You hear that, Shark?
I've heard of that before.
No, they break into little, yeah.
I think you're familiar with dry humping.
But yeah.
Let's keep it on point, folks.
No bird walking. Told Kath a little bit behind each ear.
So let's see, we boil the beer. Again, that takes about an hour. A lot of things in brewing take an hour. I don't know why. It comes out at about 212, 213 degrees. We needed to get it into one of these fermenters where it meets the yeast and starts to ferment and produce alcohol.
Up to this point, how long is this process so far that you've
3 hours.
boom, 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 boom?
Yeah, we got to get the beer up to a boil, so basically probably a half hour worth of milling into this, an hour in here. We actually recirculate the liquid in here, the extract, to make sure we get all those sugars out of there and all the flavor compounds. That probably takes another half hour. Over to here, this probably is in there for about almost 2 hours by the time you get a boil. And then, and so we need to get the beer basically from 212 degrees to 73 degrees to the fermenter, because anything over 140 degrees will outright kill the yeast. Anything over kind of the low 70s will start the fermentation. The yeast would love to be at 95 degrees. I mean, it'll go to town at 95 degrees. Unfortunately, yeast that's going to town also produces like really, really nasty flavors because it's just eating and reproducing as quickly as it can, and so it's producing all sorts of chemicals that are just not desirable in beer. So at 73 degrees, we get a controlled fermentation started. The yeasts are kind of laid back and just kind of munching away and reproducing at a controlled rate, and they don't produce those off flavors. We use what's called San Francisco lager yeast, which is the same yeast that goes into Anchor Steam beer. And then for our ales, we use an English ale yeast. So, yeah. So the beer gets pumped out of here through that big block of metal there that weighs about 350 pounds. That's a heat exchanger. It cools the beer on one side with city water. It cools the beer on the other side through our glycol system that we try to keep it about 28 degrees. And it comes out at 73 degrees at the other side and goes directly in a fermenter. And there are lots and lots of hungry yeasts there waiting for it. About 5 gallons of yeast waiting for it. And the fermentation starts almost immediately. Actually, if you come over here, there's a pretty active batch over here. So that's a batch of black beer that was just made, yeah. So it's been in the fermenter for less than 24 hours, so it's active. So that's all the CO2 that's coming out of there.
How long do you leave it in the fermenter?
It depends on the beer, but most of our beers take 15 days. And so there's a few days of very active fermentation. There's about a week of just conditioning. One of the things about yeast is, so there are off flavors that are produced by the yeast during the initial fermentation. Once the active fermentation is done, the yeast that are still in solution will actually start to reabsorb some of those chemicals that would produce off flavors because they are actually nutritious for the yeast and help in future reproduction. So they will go and grab those flavors out of solution. So they have.
So does this run 24 hours a day? Yeah.
We brew anywhere from 2 to 5 times a week, and so yeah, we'll brew 5 times next week. And yeah, it all depends.
And does somebody have to be here at night to monitor it, or it's okay?
Although, yeah, all our temperature controllers are accessible online, so everything can be monitored from home. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for a second job.
Night shift, are you?
Yeah. Actually,
I'm good at graveyard.
there's actually a 660,000 BTU burner underneath that brew kettle, and that can actually be fired up from home as well. So you fire it up from home, and then you make your way in, and it's warming up by the time you get here. So anyway, beer stays in there for about 2 weeks. About 8 days into the process, 9 days, we crash the temperature. We go from about 68 degrees down to about 35 degrees. What that does is it completely puts the fermentation to well, it's already been stopped, but it puts the total kibosh on any kind of yeast activity. Most of the yeast falls down to the bottom of the tank. We harvest the yeast and we use it in the next batch. It can last for about 8 generations. But there's different yeasts actually follow at different rates. It's called flocculation. To go with your dry hopping, yes, but at any rate, San Francisco lager yeast is a medium flocculator, so there's still yeast and other solids left in the beer. We don't want cloudy beer. And
How do you harvest the yeast?
It all falls down to the bottom, and it just goes inactive, and that's what it does when it goes inactive.
Does it float? Does it sink?
It sinks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So it's pasty?
it's like really, it's like cake batter. Yeah. When it's healthy, it's like cake batter. When it's unhealthy, it's like water, and you know that's time to throw the yeast out. Yeah, and start with a new batch. No worries. So this is this thing over here is just an industrial strength pool filter for all intents and purposes, we filter the beer through this, and it gets pumped through this and into one of these tanks. These are called bright beer tanks in our case, because all of the solids, the yeast and all the other solids have been actually filtered out in the beer. So now the beer is bright beer. In a brew pub, these would be called serving tanks, because brew pubs, rather than kegging the beer, would serve directly out of these tanks. We force carbonate all of our beer, and then we keg directly off the bottom of these bright tanks, and it goes into the cool box. Usually not for very long. That Pomona clean usually lasts 4 to 5 days, and then we're on to the next batch. So.
On CO2.
Yeah, there's a thing right here. I can't take it out right now because this one's been cleaned and sanitized. But that's a carbonating stone. It goes about that far into the bright tank. It looks like stone. It looks like it's solid, but it's actually very, very finely porous. And so you hook up pressurized CO2 from these lines right here, right into there. It forces CO2, and it comes out in incredibly fine bubbles that go into solution. And so we can very, very accurately control the amount of carbonation that's going into our beer.
I think it's science
Is it-
term, you know.
My son's
It's a science fair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is it a lengthy process to sanitize then? Is it?
Everything goes through the same process here. So whether it's kegs, the bottles don't go through quite the same process, but kegs, tanks, they get rinsed with 185-degree water, then they get cleaned with 185-degree caustic. And the caustic takes the pH up to 14, and that effectively kills and removes any kind of biomatter. And then we then rinse that out, and then we circulate acid through there. We use periacetic acid, and that takes the pH down to between 1 and 2.
Okay.
That will act as a surfactant and will sanitize, but the most important thing that the acid does is it cleans off any kind of mineral scale that built up. It's called beer stone, and it naturally builds up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no limes, limes involved.
I was asking because the other job I work is at DJ's, and they'll have these in the back, but they don't brew it there because they're the sister of the brewery that it comes to.
Yep.
But I just always see them, doing their job and tasting the beers to make sure. So do you guys have to?
Just to make sure they're good. Yeah.
I'm like, dude, I want your job. No.
Yeah. Don't worry, I'm a professional.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's not quite right. And then,
those they call them serving tanks. And BJ's has that. Yeah, obviously they changed their model quite a bit because they used to brew at every location.
Right.
Then they brewed only a few locations,
and then they brewed only their beers, and now we have everybody else's beers. So.
Yep. But it's a fun place.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's go take some more beer. We can enter a question.
Time is just right. That's about a 43-minute class. There you go.
I know.
Yeah, right. And then we filter out chlorine, which obviously is a very active, compound that would could affect the flavor of the beer. More likely, it's just going to boil off during the boil, but who needs it? Oh, bad stuff. Yeah, bad stuff. Okay. Okay, we're going to try the next seasonal. This seasonal is our second of the year. It's called the Dew to York, and the Dew to York. It was originally called the Dew to York because it's made with all English ingredients, including the barley and the hops. But except we used to make it with San Francisco lager yeast, so that's where the Dew part came in. And so instead of being the Duke of York, it was the Dew to York. And this style is actually, now we're actually making it with English ale yeast, so it is all English ingredients. And the style is called a special bitter, and despite its name, it's actually not all that bitter. But it is one of the beers that's in the family of pale ales, and so basically you go ordinary bitter, special bitter, extra special bitter if you happen to work at Fuller's, and then you go pale ale, India pale ale, and so it's kind of a family of beers, and
Dave's got it perfect.
I don't know if I could actually drink.
Oh, do you? Okay, cool.
I know I can.
You got it. I'll just get you one. Be right back. I'm sorry, excuse me.
You gotta go. Two.
Yeah. If anybody wants our beer,
To the
pour you
second job.
some.
You don't want to.
I usually this bitter, I usually.
Oh, they were. Well,
Like it's nice to try it.
What BJ's do you work at?
It's across the Montreal Hills.
Yeah.
So it is wearing cheaper per month, but really, but everybody thinks it's Ontario.
Right. I was looking for houses over there. And I thought,
Yeah.
this is.
I love BJ's.
BJ's is actually.
There you go, up and roll.
First,
$4 can you know?
my wife and I, so I first. Hey, man.
Take my job. Oh, yeah.
Besides that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we got in the car, and got out, and got back
The
in.
one in,
Let's see, guys, we gotta run.
Cute though, I mean, there's.
Take my beer.
Yeah. The really small ones are good. Yeah, it's really nice.
so we're gonna have to go in there.
Yeah.
Up in that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
But yeah,
just
I have to work
all right,
at
see you guys.
Shift.
we've got a brand new
Thanks,
holiday
Roger.
beer this year
Usually
called
after work
Brandling
here,
Cross.
you know,
It's from
I'm
England.
home or something.
And the Brandling Cross actually has kind of a little bit of a fruity, a little bit of berry flavor to it. And so that's where some of the fruitiness in this beer is coming from.
Very good.
Thank you.
That promote between is good stuff.
Oh, you're gonna love it? Yeah, so that's what you like. And that, the Pomona Queen and the Shameless McHale are pretty close. It's just that this one, the biggest difference, that one finishes roasty. This one finishes just, you know, a little bit of hop for just enough for like balance. Yeah, it's so funny when people actually come in, it's just like, the black beer
Would you rather just sip on that or taste anything else?
No, I want to say
Okay, you ready? Ready for walking along?
Yeah, the walk around. Now my tongue's just completely.
There you go.
So runaway.
The last one is Runway IPA. We named it because we're moving to Cable Airport. And,
nice.
yes, well, it's Cable Business Park, so it's just at the southwest corner. And so this is an American style IPA. You are going to notice significant bitterness in it. It is also a stronger beer, 6% alcohol, which is kind of the low end of an American IPA. But this is my favorite beer. I'm kind of a little bit more of a hothead than. Yeah. Matter of fact, I just picked up a 4-pack of an Oscar Blues IPA today. Yes. Yeah. You're gonna. That's there are 3 different kinds of hops in here that are giving you your aroma. One of them is Cascade, which was the one which is the one I brought out. But the one that's really giving it the most is called Galaxy. It's actually from New Zealand.
What, the no working say?
You get our recipe.
That would be good in your house also.
Oh, okay.
6%. No, we actually, to tell you the truth, they had off union. My brother was looking for a new one to put in the IPA, and so we were going for more of a citrusy kind of, fruity kind of thing. And he tasted this on another brewery, and we went out and tried to find it. And it turned out there were like 200, I think, and 64 pounds of it left. And they couldn't guarantee us any for the next year.
Just had to go you on that.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, so we got about 250 pounds of this hop.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, if we'd been a day later than right now, today. And I mean that for another brewery that's for most breweries that's not that big of a hop.
Yeah.
For us it's a huge hop.
Let's order pizza.
Oh, jeez. We stay here.
The reason we
We'll close up and go
and so they go from being kind of whatever your either citrusy or floral or earthy or whatever smells. They oxidize quickly. All of the acids actually take on a yellow color and start to dry out, and they actually start to smell kind of like cheese, which is, so you know you have bad hops. And that process happens very quickly with whole fresh hops. The pelletized hops, we still have hops, I think we probably have hops from the 2008 or 2009 harvest. We have to take care of them, keep them refrigerated, we keep them as airtight as possible, but that pelletization really walks stuff in there. Yeah,
So it's not like Belgian.
that's my beer right there. I love that beer. I don't drink anything else. Yeah, I know. Yeah. And that one's actually, I mean, so if the yeast is like is really the most important part of the beer. All things being equal, 70% of the flavor compounds in a beer come from the yeast, not from all the other like hops and barley and all that kind of stuff. We used, instead of, there's a California ale yeast which is used almost exclusively by the California beer industry. It produces very, very clean flavors, but it also allows the hops to just come completely forward. So as soon as you taste it, it's just like a hop explosion. It's like biting into a grapefruit. The nice thing about the English ale yeast is it allows the malt flavors to come through first, and some of the flavor hops before that burst of bitterness hits you. But once you get the bitterness, it stays and it continues to build the more you drink. Yeah. So yeah, that's my kind of beer.
Yeah. So we get Coors Light in our bottles, so we're used to that.
Actually, I'm gonna get one other. I didn't really explain the black beer very much, but I'll.
Look at that sign. Look at that sign.
I like the green. I mean, definitely that black beer was nice, but I just.
Give you that sign. They're friends.
I
can't tell time.
Yeah, that one was.
It's got a little bit of roasty.
The last two definitely are not. I'm not gonna say.
I don't know, it's on my dodgeball video.
I drink the
He's in there where with Marcus and Tim Sipping.
Still doing it.
No question about that.
Yeah, so these are the two, so you looked at the two row or the lighter malt before. These are the two barleys that produce the coffee and chocolate flavors at the back end of the black beer. And so this is called chocolate, and this is called dark coffee. And this is the stuff that comes from Europe. There's also another wheat, actually, called, the reason that the black beer is as dark as it is that it's called midnight wheat, and I believe it's the world's darkest grain. It's the most roasted grain, and it produces some roasty flavor, but overall it produces very little flavor and is only really used for color. And that's only come around in the past 2 years or something that they started producing midnight wheat.
So how much of this do you use in a batch, in one of those things to flavor the beer?
Let's see. In the black beer, we use 3 pounds of chocolate, so there's about 600 pounds of total barley almost, and 3 pounds of chocolate. So about 2% of the about 4 pounds of kiln coffee, about 12 pounds of midnight wheat. And so it's
These are all pre-measured according to the recipe, so you just open that.
Yeah, this one, actually Kurt, and I'll bring Kurt in, Kurt was just here. Yeah, Kurt makes these, so this is a 3-pound bag of, and yeah, again, our ingredients oxidize, and so this keeps it from oxidizing terribly quickly. So, because otherwise it takes some. I'm sorry?
Who works on all the formulations?
do? Do you have something you already work off of and then decide, all right, we've got to kind of manipulate it from here? Or do you come up with a new beer, seasonal or something you want to do?
Yeah, no, everything, I mean, all of these are fairly traditional styles. And like the IPA, we actually had probably, I can't even remember how many IPAs we had in here, but we probably tasted 25 or 30 different IPAs. And we had everybody from the brewery in here tasting IPA and figuring out which flavors people like best, and then headed off in that direction. So, yeah, and then, but most all of those IPAs were made with California Ale Yeast rather than an English Ale Yeast. So that was a definite change in ours.
Do you make a sample batch? Do you ever make like a small batch, or you have to fire up the whole deal?
We fire up the whole deal right now.
So
yeah,
if you want to go out on the edge and experiment with something new, you got to do the whole deal.
We got to make something we know we can sell.
If it's bad. Right?
Yeah, that's what
that discounted cake.
Yeah, exactly.
Make sure you call me. It didn't work out.
There was actually one batch.
Who am I talking about?
The strangest batch that's ever come out of here. It was our 7th anniversary, and Kurt wanted to make a 7th anniversary beer, and it's called 7-Year Itch. And unfortunately, I think the yeast was a little tired, as I remember, or something like that. So it probably should have been thrown away. But anyway, it went in and came out of the fermenter. It's like, ooh,
Wait, what's that?
I don't know about that.
What's the name to that look? You're like, oh.
Yeah, it was just like, it was just weird. It was just weird. And it was like, yeah, and so, but we kegged it off, and we put it in the cold box, and about 2 months later, we tried it again, and it completely transformed.
Wow.
And
wine, huh? It aged a little bit.
I don't know. It was a perfectly drinkable beer, but it was kind of like, it was like a heavy-bodied, I don't even know, it was like, kind of like a
Orange boom or something?
No, it's kind of like a fat iron kind of like, yeah, kind of thing. But anyway, once we started selling it, it was gone.
Wow.
Yeah, all of a sudden it was like, boom. And there's still people talking about this.
So it came out, and it was like, ugh. And then it was like,
Yeah, we started, you bet. We started selling it. Anybody wants to,
I start out, yeah, then I get a little kind of, you know,
we actually
better at the
we
end.
sold it.
And breweries,
Yeah, actually, we're trying to figure out how to manage our email list. You bet. Go ahead, go ahead. There we go. Okay, get it for you. Okay. I think we have this thing in about 30 minutes.
This is the first one.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
This is a bar.
And he was talking yours, but.
There we go.